Cool. Hi everyone. Thanks for coming along. There's a couple friendly faces in the theatre, which is nice and terrifying, so thank you. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about some more DFIR focused stuff, which I know is a bit irregular for Securi-Tay, but I think, it's cool, so we're going to talk about it. So what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to do a quick introduction about me, then we'll go into what is DFIR. So if you're not familiar with, the reactive side of security, we'll go through that quickly for you. Then we'll go on to what is attribution. So kind of a rundown on that, both sort of a brief explanation, then a more in-depth one. That will also involve a case study from my workplace, so you can kind of see how this all works in action. Then we'll go on to why is attribution important? Why does this all matter? Why do we care? The differences between the law enforcement sector and the private side, which is where I work. And then this will also include a case study of a case that was quite widespread in the news in December. And then we'll have some time for questions. So, who am I? I'm Morven MacKellar. I am an ethical hacking grad, class of 2018. I'm now a DFIR consultant at Aon Cyber Solutions, but I would like to note that this talk is not endorsed by Aon. I am not speaking on behalf of my employer. All opinions expressed are mine and mine alone. Please don't sue me. So my particular interests are in true crime and mobile device forensics, and also Whodunnit films, which is kind of why this talk is named Whodunnit. Sort of Agatha Christie style stuff, if you didn't already know that. So, what is DFIR? So basically, for those not familiar, it's an acronym for Digital Forensics and Incident Response. The aim of digital forensics, in a nutshell, is to use evidence contained within any type of digital media, so laptops, phones, anything, to prove or disprove or just allude to a sequence of events that have possibly happened. In the law enforcement sector, this is also what obviously involves a crime that has occurred, whereas in the private sector, it's more corporate espionage and all that kind of good stuff. So incident response is roughly this, but under strict time constraints and high-pressure situations. So this, as the name suggests, this occurs when an incident happens. So when a company's been breached or affected by an unauthorized network intrusion, we want to identify how this happened, why it happened, and if possible, who did it. The reason companies are generally interested in incident response is because, if they've had a cyber attack, they care about the money that they're losing from this. So we want to try and mitigate that as much as possible. So digital forensics in particular is a discipline of forensic science, as the name would suggest, which all forensic sciences are pretty closely tied to Locard's exchange principle, which is every contact leaves a trace. So this is particularly true of digital evidence because even stuff like Windows Registry is tracking so much information about what you do that it's pretty much impossible to do anything on a Windows machine without it being tracked somewhere. So just a heads up. So when we go into a case, there's generally 3 stages of each engagement, and these can vary, obviously, depending on, the type of case you're looking at, the amount of evidence you have, but the basic rundown is you have at the acquisition phase where we create a forensically sound bit-for-bit copy of the piece of digital evidence, so that, if it's a laptop, you're going to flip it over, you're going to take the hard drive out, and you're going to image it. This is followed by analysis, where we then take this forensically sound copy of the evidence and try to then determine the sequence of events. So if we have an employee who has been putting all their top secret company data onto a USB, we want to see, can we see this USB being plugged in? Can we see folders being accessed? That kind of stuff. Finally, we have reporting, which is pretty self-explanatory, but this can be anything from a quick email to a client just saying this is what's happened, here's what we found, or it can be an in-depth report, pretty extensive, some to the point where they can be presented in court for civil court cases. I mean, this is kind of how things would work in an ideal world, but as we know, this is not how things generally go. And in reality, this is kind of more what this feels like. So in forensics, you kind of feel a bit like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist sometimes, of like, this is what I think this has happened. I think this has happened. It might have. I don't know. An instant response is very much like everything's on fire. If you saw Alan from F-Secure's talk earlier, he sort of said, you know, this is the worst day of some people's careers, and it really is like that. I think instant response is just as much about people management and being able to deal with people in stressful situations as it is about the technical factors. So now that we're hopefully all on the same page of what DFIR is, we're going to talk about what exactly attribution is and why it's relevant. So how many of you guys have seen this Netflix documentary? Cool, so a couple. Basically, you guys might have a little bit of a head start on what attribution is, because I feel like this basically describes it in a pretty decent way. So for those that don't know, this series is on Netflix. It's really good. If you want to go home and watch it, I'd highly recommend it. It's based on a real life event where an individual began posting photos online, or photos and videos online, containing animal abuse. So obviously, if you're sensitive to that, I wouldn't recommend watching it. But basically, a group quickly formed to try and identify the individual responsible. So a lot of the stuff in the documentary is startlingly similar to a lot of techniques employed in digital forensics, especially in law enforcement. So there's parts of it where they're taking like still frames from the video, and they're looking at stuff like, okay, what plug sockets are in the background? What country is this in? They see a packet of cigarettes, and if you didn't know, cigarettes have very specific verbiage based on the country that they are sold in. So, you know, we have the giant, like, smoking kills. Like, some countries don't have that. They have, like, a little sly message on the side. So they're using stuff like that to try and figure out, where is this? Can we try and identify this person? So there's also one part of this where, if you see, there's like a picture of a yellow vacuum on the slide there. They find this model of vacuum and they post it on, which I didn't know this existed, but there are like vacuum enthusiast forums. So they post this vacuum. They're like, hey, I need a new part for this vacuum. Does anyone know anything about it? And they reply and they say, oh yeah, that's great. This vacuum is only sold in one specific area of the world. So that like helps them narrow down, like, okay, like we're looking for this part, like this person is in this country most likely, like just trying to filter it down. So, you know, obviously there's a bit of gloss put on this for entertainment value. It's not entirely accurate. But it's a good like first impression of attribution if you're interested. So the more sort of in-depth look at this is, so if we dig more into the theory surrounding the concept of attribution, we can break it down into three main components. And this is roughly based on a paper called Attribution Theory and Deterrence Research, which was written in 1991 by Klaus Cesar and Hans-Jürgen Kerner. So to me, these are things that I'm thinking about, like when I see individual actions in a case, but then also at the end of the case, when you have all the information in front of you, you can use this to iterate through when you have the bigger picture of exactly what's happened. So basically first we have, what is the root cause or the motive for this behavior? Like, why has this person chosen to do this? Or group. So, for example, say we have a case where a company has had ransomware deployed on their network. Is the end goal to sort of extract money, like blackmail the company, or is it more to just cause destruction and just destroy everything in sight? Or cause panic or any other sort of chaos ensuing sort of motive? And at this point, can we start to hypothesize at the possible end goal of this attacker or suspect, which you may or may not be able to do depending on the action. So second, from what I know about this person or group, both in my surrounding environment and theirs, if I do know that, what do I think about this action as an observer? Is this a good action? Is this a bad action? What do I think their next step may or may not be? Like, what is the logical next thing for them to look to do? Last, from what I've seen from that whole section, and given the evidence I have surrounding this event, do I think it is reasonable to attribute this behaviour to this person that we're maybe looking at this point? Like, does this person have the ability and the likelihood and the motive to want to do this? So continuing the ransomware sort of theme, so say we see that this ransomware has originated from Joe Blogg's account. Does this mean that Joe Bloggs is the attacker and he's released this ransomware? So I personally don't think we have enough information at the minute. So we would need to tie a motive to Joe Bloggs, or see has someone commandeered Joe Blogg's account and used that to commit this action. So what kind of things do we use to attribute acts to users? So we have two sort of main categories of things. First of all, there are host and network artifacts. So these are things found on the machine or in the network that may suggest what has been going on. So there's things like user agent strings, which are when you connect to a website, your device will send some information about like what you are. So am I on Chrome, and which version of Chrome am I on? Or am I on an iPhone, and which version of an iPhone am I on? There's also login sessions, but I'll go into that in depth in a second. Finally, there's also malware compile times. So when we examine the files involved with a piece of malware, looking at the compile times can give us a hint as to maybe what time zone this piece of malware was created in. Like, where has this come from? Maybe it lines up perfectly with, the time zone in India or Russia. Additionally to these, there are behavioral indicators. So these are any sort of habits that an attacker has or seems to have. Under this category, you have things like, what time is this attacker operational? A lot of sort of APT groups, it is almost like a full-time job to them, so they will operate 9 to 5. And is that 9 to 5 in the UK, or is it in America? What time zone does it look like they may be operating in? Or if we've got a data exfiltration case with a rogue employee, are they doing stuff after working hours? Like, are they doing stuff at 7 p.m. when there's no one else in the office? There's also patterns in software use. So does this attacker always use the same tools? Do they always use Mimikatz? Do they always make use of an AWS EC2 instance? Additionally, we can also identify where this attacker likes to put their temporary files. So if you're dropping Mimikatz in a box, where are you putting it? Are you putting it in ctemp? Are you just putting it in the root directory? All that kind of stuff. Leading on from that, there's also naming conventions. So if they're writing a piece of malware, is it always called like 1.exe or hello.exe? So it should also be noted that we can't exclusively rely on any one of these. It needs to be a group of these or multiple of these. And these are also not extensive. There's loads more things you can use for this. It's really important, if you are aiming for attribution to a specific person, that you need as much evidence of that as possible, especially if you're working in law enforcement, because, ultimately this is a case that is going to end up in court with the intent to, convince the jury that this is what happened, it was this person that did this, here's the reasons why, because, you need to convince them beyond reasonable doubt. So, as I said before, we'll go on to talk about log in and log off events. Apologies if you can't see that very well at the back, but all you really need to know is that the Windows security event log is one of many logs that Windows is, keeping track of. It's logging a ton of information about what's happening on the system. There's stuff like system logs, security logs, and application logs, which These all log things like antivirus alerts, system shutdown times, and like we see here, times that you're logging on and logging off to the system. With each different type of log, the events within those are given different event IDs to identify them by. So in this case, we're interested in 4624, which is a successful log on, and 4634, which is a successful log off. So one way in which we use this in cases when we're trying to attribute an action to at least a user account is that, so say we see a malicious executable being executed at a given time. We can look in the security event logs to see, oh, maybe did someone log in like 5 minutes before that? So if we can identify which account ran the executable and then identify what time they logged in from this 4624 event, we can take the logon ID, which is basically just a little string of numbers and letters that identifies like this session, and we can search for the corresponding 4634 log off event. So that then gives us a time period, a specific time period, within which we can then say, okay, well, so they executed the script, what else were they doing? So this is also useful in identifying, well, was this specific user, or was this an attacker remoting into this account to use it? So one way we can do this is these logon events also have a logon type ID. So this can range, I think it's 1 to about 11. This one is a 10, so this indicates a remote logon, such as through RDP, remote desktop services. You can also determine stuff like, was this a logon physically at the machine, at the keyboard? So notably, like all of this stuff is obviously specific to Windows, but there are equivalent logs in Linux and Mac as well. So now we'll talk a bit about this case study from my work. I hope this gives a pretty good rundown of how we kind of use this stuff in practice. So with this case, the client was a very large organization operating globally. So they noticed something a bit strange happening in 2 separate continents with all of their servers, which is basically this. Everything's operating at 100% util, which is not standard and is a bit of a problem. So they basically engaged us and asked us to come in and have a look and see what's going on, see what's causing this. During this investigation, it became quickly apparent that the source of this was some VMs running on each of the servers, so multiple VMs running on each server that were running Bitcoin mining operations. So looking at the configurations of the VMs and looking at the access to each server, there was one IP address that kept coming up and kept coming up. And this IP led back to a member of the IT department. So now we need to think about, so okay, has this been done by this IT guy, or has someone hijacked this guy's account and is trying to, live off the land, try and like not make it obvious? So basically what happened next was we kind of did something that's a bit unusual for us to do. So generally, if we're going into an office to seize or take hold of evidence, we'll do it after work hours so that people don't really know that we've been there. So we'll go in, like, say, 7 p.m. when everyone's gone home and take out the hard drive, image it, put it back, make sure everything looks exactly as it looked so they have no idea that we've been there. But with this case, the lawyer sort of decided that, no, we'll go to him and we'll do it during work hours and we'll kind of cut him off there. So we walked into the office with the lawyers, walked up to the guy and was like, hey, you need to step away, we're going to take this now. Which might be a bit much for like a Monday morning, but we'll see. So when we do this, we're going to then start taking photographic evidence of everything we're doing. So we're taking pictures of the outside of the machine, then also because the machine was on and running, we're going to take photos of everything that's, open on this machine. So this kind of led us to our first bit of attributing evidence, which was a VM management system which showed, a few of the VMs that we knew were associated with this Bitcoin mining activity. So that's, it's something, but it's maybe not enough to directly implicate him yet. So we also looked at his browsing data from Chrome, and this should probably serve as a warning. So if you're currently employed, I wouldn't recommend logging into your Google account on your corporate devices, because Google likes to be very helpful and sync all of your data across. So because he had logged in on his corporate device into his personal Google account, we could see his browsing data from his presumably what was his personal laptop at home, which there was a lot of stuff sort of to the tune of, how do I Bitcoin mine? How does that all work? And all these bookmarks in that sort of same vein. There was also direct visits to the Bitcoin wallets associated with the activity. So when, they were questioned about this, they sort of said oh, it wasn't me, it was a hacker Whodunnit. Okay. So we kind of looked to see, if there's any data around the times that, there's visits to Bitcoin wallets, or how do I Bitcoin mine, that we knew that this person had done. So there was other stuff in the period of time that this was all happening where they were writing emails and, looking at their online banking, doing stuff that we knew that they had done. So next up, we noticed that they were using a password manager to store their passwords. So when you extract the databases for a password manager from the system, they're obviously encrypted and we can't see them without the master key. But we realized that through virtualizing the image, which is where, if you think about that as creating a VM with the evidence so we can access it as the custodian would. So I can just log in and see, and click around, go into the file system, see what's going on. We realized we had his login credentials. When we logged in, we realized that he had cached his master key for his password manager. So as long as you could log into the machine, it would just pop up and you could look at all the passwords. So stored within there were passwords relating to the Bitcoin wallets associated. There was also this helpful note, I think it was literally called Setup, which had a full list of instructions on how to start Bitcoin mining. So, we're getting a bit closer to, it might have been this guy. Finally, as I said earlier, we saw that this guy was RDPing into these servers. And what actually happens when you RDP into a machine is if you hover over the session at any point, that image is cached in high definition. So you can use a tool such as bmctools.py to pull down the image, which is split into little tiles, and it basically kind of looks like one of these sliding puzzles. So if you rearrange it, you can literally just recreate whatever was on the screen at the time. So, that gets you the dates, the times from, the system in the corner. It can also, if they have terminals open, you can see what they're typing, what they're executing on that. So when we did that and recreated the screenshots, you could clearly see him executing executing the lines of code that we'd just seen in that LastPass note on screen at some point during his RDP session. And notably, this stuff is it's cache data. It obviously doesn't last for long, so it was a really good thing that we kind of went in during the day and kind of got him away, because if we'd gone in maybe a week later, this might not have existed. So that's sort of that case in a nutshell. I'm hoping that gives you an idea of some of the things we can string together to sort of solidify an attribution case of this person did this. So now we'll talk about why is attribution important and why do we care. So there are slight differences in the level of importance between sectors. So in law enforcement, obviously hands on keyboard, quote unquote, is sort of a very key aspect of like pretty much all cases, and if not all. Because the aim of a criminal case is this person has committed a crime, we need to prove that this person did this. And we need to prove that, John Doe was in possession of this device at this time. No one else had access. It couldn't be anyone else. It was just him. Whereas in the private sector where I work, we're not always entirely concerned with this. So sometimes, like in the previous example, it is directly relevant to the case because in that case the client wanted to know who was responsible. Whereas in a lot of cases, companies are more focused on, okay, what are my next steps? What can I do to recover from this? How can I stop this from happening again? And sort of that's where we add our value. So there's also the obvious difference of, the difference in jurisdictions. So in law enforcement, you have the ability to attempt to get a warrant to physically seize devices from people. They can also attempt to get hold of CCTV, which is sort of like a gold standard. If you're looking for attribution, that's probably one of the best things you can get is if I have camera footage, date and time of you are at this computer at this time and this is when this stuff happened, that's pretty damning evidence. So on our side of the field in private sector, we do have a bit of a narrow jurisdiction in that we can't really seize things from people. We can get a court order, which basically means we sort of ask them, please can you hand over your data or you'll be held in contempt of court. So most people do tend to, comply. We can also do the sort of CCTV stuff, but generally that's going to be, so if we're working for a client, it would be the CCTV from the client's office, which is obviously going to be a bit easier for them to give us if they want us to do the work. They're going to be quite happy to hand that over. So those are some of the basic differences. So now I'm going to talk about the post office case, which was quite big in the news in about December time, but it has been ongoing for quite a long time, about 10 years, or maybe longer. So what happened with this? This is sort of serves as what happens when we get it wrong, what's the impact on people's lives? So in this case, a group of around 550 former and currently serving sub-postmasters, who are basically the people that run the post office in your local towns, they were accused of committing fraud. So this came from the fact that there appear to be discrepancies in the accounting system, which is called Horizon. The Horizon system was introduced beginning in 1999 to around 12,000 post office branches. So these claims happened over the span of about 20 years, beginning from when Horizon was introduced to now. So I think that's why this wasn't picked up a bit earlier. But basically what ended up coming to light was that it wasn't actually that people, it doesn't appear that in all of these cases that these people did actually commit fraud. It seems that the Horizon system was deeply flawed and ideally shouldn't have been used as evidence against these people. So one such error that was brought to light in an article written by Carl Flinders for ComputerWeekly.com, who, if you're interested in a full rundown of this case, he wrote articles from the beginning to the end, spanning pretty much the whole time. So they're pretty well documented. So basically what he reported on was that one sub-postmaster in a branch was repeatedly trying to send a payment of £8,000 to a different post office branch. But presumably because the interface maybe didn't alert him to the fact that the first transaction went through successfully, he kind of just pressed the button again and again, which sort of created this discrepancy in the system, because the system recorded all of those button presses going through, but the receiving branch only recorded one successful transaction. So then for this first sending branch, it seems that they're out of pocket by about £24,000, which is obviously not accurate. Another major flaw in the Horizon system was identified by forensic examiner Andrew Clark, whom, when interviewed in 2015 by Carl Flinders, who's the same guy that wrote the first article, he was basically brought on by a client to investigate the Horizon system and its legitimacy as a piece of evidence in 2005. And one thing that he noticed was that the Horizon system did not synchronize with any external trusted time reference. So basically, an NTP server where you can call out and say, hey, what's the time? Hey, what's the time? And it will give you an accurate time source. Horizon was relying on the system clock, which, if you're not aware, can be changed by anyone with access to the machine at any time. So we can't really rely on these timestamps for anything that's happening. So all this kind of highlights the necessity for ensuring that the piece of evidence you're relying on is reliable. In the realm of DFIR, this is often referred to with the phrase trust but verify, where, typically that kind of relates to you don't want to just use one tool to look at your evidence. You want to use multiple to ensure that, it looks like this is correct from this source and this source. So we can kind of say, yeah, this is what's going on. But this phrase can also apply to viewing your evidence with a decent level of scrutiny. So in this case, we want to look at it and say, can I rely on what this software is telling me, and why can I or why can't I? So Andrew Clark, the aforementioned forensic examiner, was quoted in the same 2015 article as saying the following: I remain concerned that the digital evidence upon which they based their original prosecutions should never have been relied upon. So that kind of rounds off that case. So if we want to talk about the potential impact of what happens when we get it wrong, I think we have three major categories. The first is social issues. So if you come from a small rural town, you know that the post office is sort of a hub of the community. And, a lot of people know the people that run the post office. I'm from Dunblane, and I know the family that runs it, and I know, their kids went to school, the same school as me. So imagining having your whole community think that you've stolen money from the post office for your own financial gain just must have felt awful. Additionally, having that kind of reputation is only going to harm you in trying to find a job or just live in that community peacefully, really. Leading on to the economical impact, many of the claimants from this case paid back the money that they apparently stole, because a lot of them were hounded by debt collectors, and a lot of them just wanted the problem to go away. Some of these people paid upwards of £10,000, some up into hundreds of thousands of pounds, which obviously led a lot of people to declare bankruptcy. Finally, there are several personal issues that sort of arise from this kind of situation. One person affected was Rubina Shaheen, who was jailed for 12 months in 2010, allegedly because of the issues with the Horizon system. She's currently hoping to have her conviction overturned in light of the determination that this system was flawed. So some of the effects that she saw was that she lost her job at the post office, and she also lost her and her husband's home. Another of the claimants in this case, who is named Balvinder Singh Gill, was the postmaster in Oxford, and he was accused of stealing round about £100,000 from the post office. According to BBC News, he was told to repay the full amount in monthly instalments and was chased relentlessly by debt collectors, he was one of these people that had to declare bankruptcy. So after his self-described decade of hell, he suffered a severe mental breakdown and was actually sectioned as a result of these issues. He was quoted as saying to BBC News, "Our reputation in our community was totally destroyed. More than the money, it's just the justice. Mainly that we can get on with our lives and put right a lot of people that thought we were bad." So, you can see from this, combined, like, all of these issues affecting upwards of 550 people, these mistakes can be devastating. And all of this could have been avoided by ensuring that the process of attribution was followed stringently, ensuring that your evidence can be relied upon and is, you've scrutinised it and ensured that you're confident that this is saying what you think it is saying. So it's important to know that if we're going to point the finger at someone, we need to make every possible effort and explore every possible avenue to ensure that we're pointing the finger in the right direction. So with that, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
With your loading times for Windows, is there any way of obfuscating that? You can force an error, for example, log off, so you can find that you can't end the session.
Possibly. You do see crashes from these types of log-off events. I'm not entirely sure about that one, though. Come and find me after, and I'll try and get you a good answer to that. Yep.
Obviously, this happened over a long period of time. How do you demonstrate things on the timeline that makes sense and can be understood by all of the relevant people? It's quite difficult to explain.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that case is actually ongoing. So I think we'll continue to see people come forward and cases progress through that. So that hasn't entirely come to a close yet. So obviously, like I mentioned, Rubina Singhal, she is, currently looking to have her conviction overturned, because she has already done her jail time. That's all stuff that needs to be rectified, as long as the correct evidence is presented. So yeah, I think we'll still continue to see that case evolve through time. Yeah, to make it more accessible. So I think Carl Funders is probably doing the best job at that because he's been documenting the case from the whole time. I don't know if we'll ever get a concise, here is exactly what's happened and in a presentable form that a layperson can understand. That would be great to prevent this from ever happening again, but I think we'll just need to see with time. Yeah.
So when this initially kicked off, most of us must have got auditors and what the hell was going on. So have they been found liable for basically copying this royally up?
I'm actually not aware. I'll need to have a look into that, but I think there is definitely that Andrew Clark, the forensic examiner I mentioned. He has posted an article about him being approached by a solicitor to examine the Horizon system, and he did say he sort of said some things that maybe they didn't like too much, i.e. your timestamps aren't going to be valid, and they just kind of pushed him to one side and proceeded with the case anyway. So, yeah, we'll see. No worries. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in this kind of case, you will have generally a forensic expert from both sides. So you'll have one guy who's sort of validating what's going on and the other person claiming okay, this is what's happening. And maybe the forensic expert for the defense will come back and say, well, no, and this is why. So that's kind of something that happens in the courtroom generally, of just you go back and forth. Yeah?
What would you say the biggest challenges are between working with the NIR or public sector, law enforcement sector, versus private sector? It's actually a different fight over there.
Yeah, so they're definitely, they're cut from the same cloth, but very different in the types of cases that they deal with. I'd say in law enforcement, though I've never worked in law enforcement, the kinds of cases they get can be quite harrowing and quite disturbing for people to deal with. Because obviously there is stuff like animal abuse, child exploitation. So that's probably the toughest things to deal with, I'd imagine. Yeah. So I need to look a bit more in depth into what exactly the flaws were, but I think majority of them were to do with validation. So like with that example of like, okay, I'm going to send this payment, there wasn't enough of a robust validation system to prevent that from looking like multiple transactions when actually only one's gone through. Yeah.
This indicates that there was no reconciliation of all the transactions.
I suppose so. I'm not actually entirely sure. I've not seen the internal workings of the Horizon system. I've only seen what is available open sourced in articles. So quite possibly.
You'd have thought that if I could send 24 grand and only 8 receive, then what happened to the extra money on the system?
Yeah, well that's exactly how this case has become so prevalent, is because the implication of like, oh, this money has sort of disappeared, the first conclusion that the prosecutors came to was, oh, okay, well, there's all this money missing, this person must have stole it, we'll just run with that and go. It's kind of Occam's razor. Yep.
You see the first case study about the boy with his last pass.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you didn't have any expectation of privacy when you were using your corp IT, right? Which is fair enough, but how far do you take that? Like with the synced personal Google data and then just straight up accessing somebody's like last pass, to me that seems like it's stepping a bit too far. Like actually going to somebody's password manager like that, like fair enough, you're a criminal or whatever, but how far do you take that? How often does that occur?
So generally my understanding is anything that's on a corporate device is generally technically owned by the corporation. That's why when you log into your work laptop, it comes up with a big disclaimer, like mine says this is property of Aon, anything you do on here is property of Aon. So any data stored on that device is we're allowed to dig into that, basically. The thing with the LastPass stuff, we would never say take passwords from that and use them. It was just, let's have a look and see, surface level, what accounts are in here, what did they have access to.
So have you ever seen that challenge? Because those sort of stock disclaimers, while they are true to a certain extent, it's also cast that. No,
definitely not. Personally, I haven't seen that challenged, but I would imagine it would may be possible.
On that point, at what point do you think it's fair to assume or to request that the image data be deleted if the person's left the organisation or whatever? Would it then be appropriate to say all images of my stuff whilst I've been there should now be deleted? You shouldn't really be accessing all of the research history of the individuals that have left the organisation so that we can then attack them in the future.
Yeah, quite possibly. I think especially with GDPR being so prevalent now, that's probably going to become much more of a thing of, here's a request, please delete all of my data. I'm not entirely sure how that would work in practice, but I'll have a think. If you come and find me afterwards, I'll maybe try and think of something for that.
And what about phones? Because that's the logical next step, isn't it?
Yeah, we do see a lot of phones. Obviously, I'm quite interested in mobile devices, so that's kind of what I like to look at. Especially with phones, people carry them around a lot. People generally tend to be a bit more lax in how they use corporate devices. I've seen people just install Asda shopping on their work phone, obviously do their home shop on their work phone. But yeah, I think people just need to be aware that, this is a corporate device, it doesn't technically belong to you, and you should be only conducting work-related matters on that device. Yeah.
What actually happens when Bitcoin's timelines get auctioned off, or
That's one thing I'm not clear on, which I would like to know the answer to as well. Yeah.
Could you repeat that question?
Sorry. What happens to all the Bitcoin this time around? Aeon's got it.
I'd love to say that I'm now in possession of some bitcoins, but no, that's not the case.
If it's a significant amount of money to get you in the first place, how much did you make?
I'm actually not entirely sure. I can't remember the exact figures, but yeah, it must have been a decent amount. I mean, if you're going to have 2 entire continents worth of servers operating at 100% util, you probably made a decent amount.
What's your experience? How far do companies go with that? It's not something that's being or staff member, but it's something externally, because it could almost be an endless task to get attribution when it's somebody somewhere in the world. Where do they stop, particularly with this legislation?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And that is sort of where I said that generally in the private sector, generally, they're not as interested in directly attributing people. So if you just have a network intrusion, they're maybe more interested in plugging that hole, making sure it doesn't happen again. If the time and the budget allows, maybe look into where this originated from, like how this happened. But yeah, generally, I'd say in my experience, most companies are more interested in the actual events rather than who did them.
What about email and Office 365 phishing? You could say I was phished, and then I didn't send that email, so you stick it.
That is one thing, yeah. We would have to follow that trail back and see if maybe did someone access that account and send that email remotely? Things like that. But that's entirely based on the case at hand. Think we're good? Cool.